Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nasrullah Nafeno, and in this video I'll read about an article and tell you 10 faults and consonants in the article and use them in a sentence. Okay, let's begin. Slipping through Hurricane Helene. Last week, warning about the imminent arrival of Hurricane Helene, the National Weather Service in Fla used the word unsurvivable, and yet the storm seemed to take much of the country by surprise. You might have thought, not that long ago, that the arrival of extreme weather could wake us up, lately from climate complacency, but the dull drumbeat of disaster seems almost to be putting us to sleep instead. Even the imminent arrival of a catalysm like Helene, a Category 4 storm that spanned more than 400 miles across the Gulf Coast and threatened communities as far north as Appalachia, was not enough to generate all that much attention ahead of time, when more might have been done to limit the devastation. The storm has so far produced at least 100 deaths and perhaps 160 billion in damage, according to early estimates. In Florida's Big Bend region, Helene was the third hurricane to make landfall in barely a year, flattening beach towns and Barrier Island and sending water into attics of homes as far away as Tampa Bay. In several states to the north, locals from dozens of communities hundreds of miles from one another were calling the storm our Katrina, some of them watching walk home or shiny cascade carried downstream, others clinging to tree branches for hours on end waiting for the flood water to recede or help to arrive. In Tennessee, there was no emergency declared before hospital patients were evacuated from a rooftop by helicopter, and as of Saturday, across western North Carolina, weather of vulnerable power substations were still down, along with the infrastructure and power lines meant to actually deliver electricity and vast majority of the world's supply of high-purity quartz, and necessary input for the production of semiconductor. Dozens of coal ash ponds holding billions of tons of toxic coal ash have likely been flooded as well. Cars and trucks were tossed around like toys. 40 trillion gallons of rain fell in total, the equivalent of one-third of the total volume of Lake Erie, enough to cover the entire state of Massachusetts in 23 feet of water. The intense rainfall was made over the last week, perhaps 50% intense of parts of Georgia and the Carolinas by global warming. Other rapid assessments suggested it was perhaps only 20% more intense. Entire towns appear to have been turned into flotsam or pulverized into splinters, and few of those living in the hardest hit areas even carried flood insurance. In Asheville, NC, which sits hundreds of miles from the coastline and thousands of feet above the sea level and is now the drowned ground zero of the storm, the National Flood Insurance Program coverage rate was under 1%. Across the country, as many as 6 million more homes are at severe risk of flooding than are even included on the several governments' flood risk maps. Michael Thomas points out, in the aftermath of the storms, across Asheville's Buncombe County, 17 times as many homes had been judged at risk in a 100-year flood even as carried insurance against that risk. Helene was called a 1,000-year flood for certain parts of the Southeast, though those terms grow less meaningful almost by the day. An ostensible 1,000-year storm had hit the coastal Carolinas just 1 week before. Sometimes, worst case scenarios really do come to pass. The climate scientist Daniel Swain wrote over the weekend on Sunday, and I think we often lack the collective imagination to fully envision what that looks like. A changing climate, a changing world, card 1 of 4. Climate change around the world in postcard from a world on fire. 193 stories from individual countries show how climate change is reshaping reality everywhere, from dying coral reefs in Fiji to disappearing oases in Morocco and far, far beyond. The role of our leaders, writing at the end of 2020, Al Gore, the 45th President of the United States, found reason for optimism out by the passing of major climate legislation. That doesn't mean there haven't been criticism. For example, Charles Harvey and Kurt House argued that subsidies for climate capture technology will ultimately be a waste. The worst climate risk mapped. In this feature, select a country and we'll break down the climate hazard it faces. In the case of America, our maps developed with experts show where extreme heat is causing the most deaths. What people can do, Justin Gillies and Hal Harvey describe the types of local activism that might be needed, while Saul Griffiths points to how Australia showed the maps on rooftop solar. Meanwhile, small changes at the office might be one good way to cut significant emissions, writes Carlos de Gamarra. Americans watching disaster footage from a distance, collapsed bridges and disappeared roads, ash fields submerged by sludgy brown floodwater, wondered how hurricanes might produce such devastation. So far from shore and so high up in the mountains. They used the words unprecedented and unthinkable, and grimly recalled silly rankings and so-called climate havens, often produced in partnership with real estate brokers, which name as well as a top choice destination for those seeking safety from extreme weather. In conversation and on social media, they suggest, as they had with floods in Vermont and orange skies in New York last summer, that the lesson of Helene is that nowhere is safe from climate disaster. An essay bearing that headline, published in Politico, was presented by Chevron. The real lesson may not be quite so grim, though it also demands more of us. To the extent we might enjoy safety and stability in a world ever more pockmarked by climate impacts, it won't be because we casually circled heavens on maps, but because we built and designed them for ourselves. Helene gives one vision of the future, with a storm scarring a whole region and imposing perhaps a decade of recovery, but in truth, as extraordinary as its devastation might seem. This kind of flooding in this kind of setting was unthinkable, or, for that matter, even unprecedented. Indeed, it happened in western North Carolina in 1916, and Hurricanes Camille 1969 and Agnes 1972 offer additional cautionary tales for those with foreshortened memories. There was similarly spectacular flooding nearly simultaneously in Kathmandu, Nepal, on the other side of the planet, where nearly 150 have died and landslides have flattened whole neighborhood after half a year's rainfall in 2 days in a city twice as high up in the mountains and twice as far from the coast as Asheville. These days, even up Quiticus, news stories produce some amount of lamentation that nobody is covering this, since everyone loves to post media criticism, and in an endless scroll, it's easy enough to find sufficient strawman. We heard a lot about social media echo chamber, but its greatest trick is showing you stuff to get outraged about, including the apparent indifference or lack of interest of others. At first, over the weekend, word of Helene's devastation crisscrossed the country almost by whisper, in part because the few in position to observe the greatest damage firsthand lacked cellular and internet connection with which to transmit their picture, and in part because national media hadn't quite anticipated the scale of destruction, and local media, the heroic, was only capable of so much. Soon enough, the storm claimed a foothold on the country's front pages in the national consciousness. But by then it was hard to escape the impression that as natural disaster and extreme weather even pile up in our feeds, they are somewhat losing their salience as cultural force, producing less a sense of rupture reality than more quotidian disruption, even receding from view as a perceived consequence of ubiquitous back-to-back hurricanes, thousand-year floods, the return of the urban firestorm. Many of these grim disasters seem to loom larger as horrifying long-term prediction than they do as actual weather events that are presently leaving whole population devastated in their wake. As heavy floodwater retreated, laborers pointed to the threat that advance warning and disaster relief posed in by Project 2025, emphasizing how uninterested in relief Donald Trump was as president. After Hurricane Matthew hit North Carolina, he released 1% of the state's request relief, and he had hoped to cut the federal disaster response budget aggressively, proposing cut to FAMA of more than 60%. Trump halted President Biden for supposedly ignoring calls from Gov. Brian Kemp of Georgia last week, though Kemp in fact praised the president for his responsiveness, and across the political spectrum came criticism of state leaders and federal authorities, from those watching the humanitarian disaster in person or through their phones, and wanting to pin responsibility for it on emergency response in action. The thing is, there was action. Disaster response is a jury-rigged patchwork, imperfect at best, and deeply in need of reform, as the disasterologist Samantha Montano, among others, has emphasized. But the tragedy of Helene is not that nobody arrived in its wake to help, because people have. The tragedy is that the storm did more and got there first. The pattern is now familiar, but the country has seemingly chosen not to be prepared as much as grow inert. And now I will be reading the vowel E. Weak, 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 weak. O. Grow, 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 grow. E. When, 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 when. E. Far, 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 far. Road, 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 road. E. Flood, 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 flood. A. That, 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 that. E. With, with, with. U. Into, into. U. Support, 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 support. And now for the consonants. H. Hurricane, 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 hurricane. The, 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 the. Storm, 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 storm. The, devastation, 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 devastation. S, catalysm, cataclysm, 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 cataclysm. F, imperfect, 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 imperfect. Rain, 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 rain. N, national, 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 national. L, landfall, 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 landfall. B, power, 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 power. And now for the sentence example. The floods caused by the rain can lead to severe disruption in transportation and communication, leaving communities isolated and urgent needs of assistance. Thank you.